The San Siro is roaring, but not with the sound of celebration. On May the 24th, 2009, as AC Milan's captain walked out for his final home game, the cathedral he had defended for a quarter of a century was raining down whistles. Banners stretched across the Curva, words sharp enough to cut through decades of loyalty. Paolo Maldini, the boy who became Milan's heart and soul, was being jeered in the very place where he built his legend. He was supposed to take his final bow as a king, a one-club icon whose name was etched into football history. Instead, he stood under a storm of boos, walking his lap of honour with a face carved from stone, his pride shielding him from a betrayal that few could have imagined. This is not a story of simple applause and farewells. It's a story of loyalty tested, of passion turned against his own hero, and of a king leaving his castle not to cheers, but to contempt. Why did the San Siro boo its greatest captain? And how did Maldini's final dance become one of football's most shocking goodbyes? Before we understand the boos, we must remember the crown. Paolo Maldini was Milan. Born into football royalty, Maldini's destiny was written in red and black. His father, Cesare Maldini, was Milan's captain in the 1960s, and the man who lifted the club's very first European Cup. But Paolo's rise was not mere nepotism. He would surpass even his father's legacy. He debuted at just 16 years old in January of 1985, under Swedish coach Nils Lidholm, who famously said he played Maldini because he never made a mistake. It was unheard of. A teenage defender thrown into one of the world's toughest leagues, in an era where defenders were judged not just by skill, but by grit, strength, and tactical intelligence. Paolo had it all. Guided by Franco Baresi, Milan's legendary captain, Maldini matured quickly. Baresi wasn't just a mentor, he was a guardian. Together they became the backbone of a Milan side that would dominate football for decades. Over the next 24 seasons, Maldini's trophy cabinet became a museum of football history. He lifted 7 Serie A titles, guiding Milan through different eras of dominance. He conquered Europe 5 times, etching his name into Champions League folklore. He celebrated 3 Intercontinental Cups, 5 European Super Cups, and 1 Coppa Italia. And through it all, he wore the same badge, amassing over 900 appearances for a single club, a feat that feels almost mythical today. He was a revolutionary defender, redefining the art of anticipation. Maldini famously said, "If I have to make a tackle, I've already made a mistake." His defensive intelligence made him a nightmare for attackers, and his elegance on the ball made him look more like a midfielder than a centre-back. In 2005, in what would be one of his most iconic moments, Maldini scored the fastest goal in a Champions League final. Just 50 seconds into Milan's clash with Liverpool in Istanbul. Though the night ended in heartbreak, it showcased his leadership even in defeat. Football royalty recognized him as their equal. Alessandro Del Piero called him simply the best there is.
The greatest Italian football player of all time is...
I'm gonna say Maldini.
Sir Alex Ferguson, after decades of managing against the world's greatest, declared him the finest player I've ever faced. Paolo Maldini wasn't just a captain. He was the face of Milan's golden dynasty. But every kingdom has politics, and even the most loyal king can face rebellion. The whistles of 2009 weren't spontaneous. They were the result of over a decade of tension, simmering under the surface of San Siro's most passionate section. The Curva Sud. Back in the 1997-98 season, Milan's form fell apart. Frustration boiled over as ultras hurled oranges and objects onto the pitch during a clash with Parma, halting the match for 5 minutes. Maldini, already a senior leader, didn't stay quiet. He condemned the protest publicly, saying the team needed support, not chaos. To the ultras, this was betrayal, a captain siding with management over supporters. A year later, when Milan secured another Scudetto, Maldini celebrated differently. Instead of joining the traditional applause to thank the fans, he slipped into the dressing room to share the moment privately with teammate Alessandro Costagurta. What was to him an innocent act felt to some fans like arrogance. But the relationship fractured for good after 2005's Istanbul disaster. Milan had blown a 3-0 lead in the Champions League final, losing to Liverpool in penalties. The team returned home humiliated, and a group of ultras gathered at Malpensa Airport to voice their anger. Reports claimed Maldini lashed out, allegedly calling them mercenari and pezzenti, mercenaries and mangy. Maldini denied the insult, saying he had only defended his teammates. But for many in the Curva, the story became gospel. He wasn't one to back down. Over the years, when jeered, Maldini would sometimes silence them with a ziti gesture, finger pressed to his lips. He criticised violence in football, the political games of ultras, and sometimes even their banner protests. To many Milanisti, he was a symbol of professionalism. To the Curva, he was seen as distant, a player who had forgotten who filled the stands. This wasn't hatred. It was a clash of cultures. Maldini's discipline versus the Curva's raw passion. A king who ruled by principle in a kingdom that thrived on emotion. That tension would soon define his farewell. The 2008-09 season was supposed to be Maldini's grand send-off. Instead, it was a year of chaos. On the pitch, Milan were no longer Italy's undisputed powerhouse. Inter Milan under Jose Mourinho dominated Serie A. Milan's squad looked tired, struggling to compete in Europe or domestically. They were knocked out of the UEFA Cup early and eliminated from the Coppa Italia. Off the pitch, frustration simmered. Silvio Berlusconi, Milan's owner, had begun tightening the club's budget. Longtime fans accused him of squandering Milan's identity. Then came the Kaká saga, a soap opera that dominated headlines. In January, it seemed certain the Brazilian star would leave for Manchester City. Kaká famously waved from his window to pleading fans, rejecting the move. But by summer, he was sold to Real Madrid. Milan's future looked bleak, and fans were furious. Even Maldini's farewell became a battleground. The ultras wanted to choreograph the tribute, planning banners and displays to honour their captain. But the club rejected their proposal and organised the celebration themselves, handing out commemorative scarves and merchandise. To some in the Curva, this was another sign of Maldini siding with management over supporters. San Siro was a pressure cooker, and on May the 24th, the tension would erupt. Milan versus Roma, Paolo Maldini's 900th appearance, his final game at San Siro. The stage was set for celebration. Roma's players walked out in shirts that read "Grazie Paolo, Grande Capitano." The stadium roared. The world expected tears, applause, and a hero's farewell. But when Maldini made his lap of honour, the banners began to rise. The first one cut deep. For your glorious 25-year career, heartfelt thanks from those you branded mercenaries and mangy. Another followed. Thanks, Captain. On the pitch, an undying champion, but no respect for those who made you rich. Then came the final blow. A colossal Milan shirt bearing the number 6, Franco Baresi's shirt, with the message, there is only one captain. It was a brutal gesture. The Curva had crowned Baresi their eternal captain, effectively dethroning Maldini at his own farewell. As whistles filled the air, Maldini's face remained unreadable. But when the match ended, a 3-2 defeat to Roma, he made his feelings clear. "I am proud to be nothing like them." The statement sent shockwaves across Italy. Maldini had just ended his San Siro career not with humility, but with defiance. The reaction was immediate. Italian newspaper Gazzetta dello Sport described the scene as surreal, publishing a striking image of Maldini walking past the banners, head high, looking like a betrayed monarch. The Guardian wrote that a day meant for celebration had quickly soured. The world couldn't believe it. Paolo Maldini, one of the most respected footballers in history, had been booed by his own fans. Milanisti across the globe condemned the Curva Sud, calling their protest a disgrace. Fan forums overflowed with messages of apology to Maldini. But Ultras leader Giancarlo Capelli defended their stance, insisting it wasn't a protest, but a statement. "We just wanted to make clear what we thought about some of his comments and behaviour over the years. It wasn't hatred." Maldini's teammates stayed silent publicly, but their actions spoke louder than words. Roma's squad had already honoured him with shirts. Teammates embraced him. Opponents lined up to swap shirts and shake his hand. And 1 week later, Italian football itself would give him the send-off he deserved. On May 31st, 2009 in Florence, Paolo Maldini played his final professional game. There were no boos, no banners, just respect. When Carlo Ancelotti substituted him in the 90th minute, Fiorentina's fans, bitter rivals of Milan, rose to their feet. The entire Artemio Franchi Stadium erupted into applause. Maldini waved goodbye, walking off the pitch as a legend. Kaká scored that night, and the final whistle marked the end of Maldini's illustrious career. On Facebook, Maldini shared only 3 words: "Un sogno svanito," a dream faded. The boos of San Siro may have stung, but this ovation in Florence was a reminder. Paolo Maldini belonged to football history, not just to Milan. Maldini's farewell was not a fairy tale. It was something rarer, a glimpse of how loyalty can outlast love. He gave Milan 25 years of his life. He became a symbol of discipline in a sport that worships chaos, and he never bent to fan politics. For some, that made him distant. For others, it made him immortal. If love is loyalty, what is loyalty without love? Maldini answered that question with his career. He stood for professionalism in a culture built on emotion. He was a captain who didn't pander, a leader who didn't need their approval. Even in his final game at San Siro, under a storm of whistles, he walked like a king. His story is proof that applause is temporary, but respect is eternal. The Curva may not have cheered, but football did. Maldini's legend was not defined by the banners or boos, but by the 3 decades of brilliance that came before them. The perfectly timed tackles, the Champions League trophies, and the badge he wore for a lifetime. Paolo Maldini didn't need their cheers. He earned their respect.